Thank you very much indeed, Sir Roger. And may I first of all join honourable members in congratulating my honourable friend in initiating this debate and for the very moving and inspiring speech which he gave, an explanation about the importance of this subject. And I'm very pleased to be able to take part in it, both as an ordinary member of this House and as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Global LGBT Rights, which is one of the largest APPGs in this Parliament. Much of our work is focused on the need to ensure that terrible abuses of LGBT plus people around the world don't happen, and in pressing for action to deal with it. But in doing that, we have to ensure that we are upholding the highest standards in our own country. And I think after the conclusion of equal marriage legislation in England and Wales, which was followed rapidly by Scotland, it was easy to think that the legislative journey was largely complete in most of the United Kingdom, and that we could lift our sights and look at what was happening globally. But of course, there is unfinished business in our own country. There is the unfinished business of equal marriage in Northern Ireland, for a start. But there are also continuing concerns about the bullying of young people. There are continuing concerns about discrimination in the workplace. There are particular concerns about the lack of role models in certain sports and the need to ensure that young people and the heroes that they have fully reflect the diversity of today's society. So there is much work that still needs to be done, and that is, I think, particularly true in schools, because we know from Stonewall's school survey that was done that there has been an absence of the kind of sex and relationship education that children need to ensure that they can be safe, that they understand the importance of all of that, that they understand that relationships can be different but are just as valid, that if they themselves are different, that is nothing to worry about. All of that is immensely important, and that's why I really welcome the guidance which the government issued this year, which was intended to strengthen sex and relation education guidance in secondary schools and relationships education in primary schools. But there are a number of issues that I think we just need to consider. The first has been brought into sharp relief by the protests outside Birmingham schools. And I attended a meeting that was, I think, of representatives of Parkfield School in Birmingham that was organised in this House a month or two ago. And frankly, I had already been pretty horrified by the film that we were all watching on the news of the protests and the nature of those protests that was taking place outside those schools. I was even more alarmed when I listened to the evidence of the leaders of those schools and the pressures that they felt that they had been put under by those parents. And they did raise one issue that I simply want to put to the Minister, and I do this in as neutral a way as I can, but I just want to understand what the government's view of this is, because while relationships education has effectively been made discretionary for primary schools, the views of these head teachers was that it should not be. They felt that the fact that it was discretionary placed a huge burden and responsibility on them and made them the targets of parental protest, and that it would actually be easier for them if it was very clear to every school what was required of them to teach. Now, I think that there may be good reasons why it has been framed in this way by the government, so I'm not offering a criticism of the government, but I would like to understand what the rationale is and to question whether, at the very least, the guidance that is being offered to schools needs to be more explicit, or whether more effort needs to be made to ensure that this guidance can be implemented by schools without them fearing any kind of repercussion. The second issue that I want to raise is the whole question of protests outside of schools. My honourable friend said so much that I agreed with, but one thing I did not agree with him about was when he said that he respected the right to demonstrate outside schools. I would like to raise the question about whether it is ever right to have protests, particularly of the kind that we have seen, outside school gates. And I note that my right honourable friend, the new Secretary of State, said that he thought that there was no place for protests outside any schools. And I think that I agree with that, particularly outside primary schools. When these protests are vociferous, bullying, must be intimidating to parents. And if they are intimidating to parents, what can their children be thinking about this? And these are young children too. And I think most of us who saw the film, the way in which these parents were conducting themselves outside the schools, the manner in which they were hectoring, was actually disturbing. And I think that we are, of course, all proud of living in a country where peaceful protest is permitted. It is part of the sort of fundamental nature of our democracy that we allow that. But we've always understood, haven't we, that where protest spills over into harassment, it is not acceptable. It indeed becomes criminal. And good policing relies on the ability to exercise a judgment about where that line has been crossed. And I think there is a real question about whether these kinds of protests should be allowed right outside the school gate, because they are harassing, and I think it's important that that issue is looked at as well. The third issue I just want to raise is the question of resources, because the new guidance is, as I said, immensely welcome. But there is a question that has been raised by Stonewall, which does such excellent work in this area, and others, about whether there is sufficient resource to ensure that schools can receive the training and information that they need to implement the new guidance. I think the estimate of the amount of money that would be needed, that the government made itself, was a sum that was considerably in excess of the £6 million that has been available. Now, today, the Chancellor has made an immensely welcome announcement of a spending uplift for our schools. And I wonder if my right honourable friend will be able to say whether he thinks more resource will be available to schools to ensure that this important new guidance can be implemented in an effective way. I was very heartened by the statement of the new Education Secretary when he said that head teachers should be able to teach about Britain as it is today. I think that our head teachers, our school governors, our chairs of governors and teachers need to know that the strongest possible lead is being given by ministers and this place about the importance of same-sex relationship education. And I question the extent to which we should at all license any suggestion that it is right to prevent teaching that same-sex relationships are valid. We have, I think, got past the point where we believe it's acceptable to sell goods on a discriminatory basis. We've outlawed that. Where you can discriminate against people in the workplace, we've outlawed that. In so many areas of public life now, we are absolutely clear that discrimination on the grounds of sexuality is simply unacceptable. So I question why it might be acceptable to prevent a school from teaching, even if it's children who are of a relatively young age, that same-sex relationships are valid. And I'm not sure that we should be tolerant about those who are seeking to try and prevent that if we are going to uphold the values that we hold dear in this country. and to allow this kind of, the importance of that kind of teaching to be swept aside seems to me to be potentially subjecting young children to to understanding the wrong thing at a very formative age. So I think we should be resolute about universal values of equality, and resolute right from the top, and transmit those values to every school. And I'm afraid that I think that if there are those who are saying that they don't wish this validity to be taught, I think we have to face that down, just as we do if we say that if people say that they would like to be able to exclude gay couples from their bed and breakfast, or they would like to be able not to employ a gay person, or they would like not to be able to offer a service to gay couples. We don't tolerate that anymore. Why should we tolerate this? I think that we have to be clear about that, precisely because this is such an important age that children should be taught about our common values. May I say this finally? My honourable friend mentioned the issue of the Catholic Church. A few months ago, my honourable friend, the member for Reigate, who is the secretary of the all-party parliamentary group on global LGBT rights that I mentioned, and I attended a meeting in the Vatican, which was intended to be with the Pope, but transpired in the end to be with the Cardinal Secretary of State, to discuss with Baroness Helena Kennedy and the International Bar Council and others the Catholic Church's stance on homosexuality. And the particular proposal that we were making is that the Catholic Church could and should at the very least condemn violence against LGBT people. Catholic Church has immense influence and importance in many regions of the world, particularly in South America and Southern Africa. And it is a shame that there is not a stronger stance on the part of leaders of the Catholic Church against something that we should all be able to agree with, whatever our view about homosexuality and the validity of homosexual relationships. That violence against anybody is wrong. And I think the Catholic Church should be able to say that, and I think it would be immensely powerful if they could. In my work as chair of the new Global Equality Caucus, tying up parliamentarians from across the world to promote LGBT+ rights, I go to many different countries to talk to parliamentarians about these issues. Next week, I will be talking to Czech parliamentarians about same-sex marriage. The following week, I will be in Tokyo talking to Japanese politicians and others from the Asia-Pacific region about equality issues. We have to be able to hold our heads up high in doing that, and I think for the most part we can. But this is unfinished business in our schools. I'm grateful for the robust stance that the government has taken, but it really must see this through now, with the clearest possible guidance, with the clearest possible leadership and support for those teachers that are being oppressed in Birmingham and elsewhere, and with the resources to match.
Yeah.